Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Our Lady of Lourdes and the beginning of our 100th anniversary celebrations. Today, we have to begin with what is important, our history, the reason why we would come together to celebrate 100 years. And we're very blessed because with us is Stephanie Stevens, who is not only our historian for the parish, but the historian for Hunterdon County, and quite aware of what's going on. Also giving us a little guidance throughout the day will be Deacon Chuck from our parish, who will keep us on track for this next few minutes as we begin our little bit of a history of who we are and where we've been, and hopefully where we're going. Stephanie, Chuck, it's yours.
Okay. Most of you probably know that Father Lynn and I came here to this parish from St. Joseph's in Highbridge. And if you're familiar with Highbridge, you know where that church is on the hill, Main Street, going up to California. And that's not the original church. The original church there was built, I think, in the 1850s by Irish Catholics who bought the defunct Methodist church from around the corner. This man that carried it physically down to that site and reassembled it. Anybody asked them why, what they were doing, they told them they were building a pencil factory because the anti-Catholic sentiment at the time was very strong. So they built it, and then after it was built, the bishop, I think it was Bishop Walsh, consecrated it. And then in the late 1890s, everything on that side of the street burned down on Saturday night in a fire that started in a bakery chimney. And everything, including the church, was destroyed. And so then that church, which was built in 1898, that church was built. A lot of people who live in Highbridge are probably not aware of any of that history, unless they happen to stumble across it somewhere. And they're probably not aware, for example, that Father McGrath, who was the pastor there in the 1930s, single-handedly turned back a group of Nazi youth who wanted to parade through Highbridge. These things that are a part of local history are the pieces that make up the history of the whole nation, of the history of us as a people. And so here in this parish and in this little hamlet of White House Station and in this township of Readington, we're very fortunate to have Stephanie, who has taken the trouble and done the scholarship to recreate and to record for us, as she did in her monograph about her life. How did this all start? How is it that we are all sitting here right at this moment? And that's what Stephanie's going to explain to us today.
And don't fall asleep. Okay, I come down. Thank you. Anyway, one day, my husband and I were walking out of church without any kids. It was delightful. We have 5. They were all in college or someplace, but they weren't with us. And we looked around and we looked at each other. We said, you know what? There are no babushkas. There are no babushkas in church anymore. And we were so disappointed because all the years we lived here, there were all these lovely little ladies, mit the babushkas, believe me. And as a matter of fact, my husband used to say, the only reason they talk to me, they never talk to him, but they would talk to me, is because they think I'm Polish. Because it's true. These little old ladies would sit, and gentlemen, they were all farmers at that time, and they were busy chatting after church. After church, in the old church, they'd stand around for an hour at least talking to each other. And they thought I was Polish. I had one dear little lady who used to sit in a pew right over there when we moved into this church and speak to me in Polish. And Helen O'Melia, those of you who remember good old Helen. She used to say, I forget the lady's name, she doesn't speak Polish. She's Irish. But St. Stephen, of course, is the patron saint of Poland. You can't hear? All right, Father, you're in charge.
Okay, come here.
Where is it? Oh, there you are.
I'm going to bring you up then.
Okay, if you can't hear, just raise your hand like in school. Raise your hand, okay? If you don't raise your hand until I finish talking. But anyway, so with the idea that there were no more babushkas in church, my husband said, well, why don't you write something? So I said, okay, I will. So I spent a couple of years, because people don't just take little books and booklets and sit down and write them down. It takes years of research to get the story on the whole thing. And so here we are in our little old church over there. And it turns out that I learned a lot about Polish history. European. The Polish nation was destroyed. And it seems like it was every century, maybe 3 times. The Russians, the Prussians, and the Austrians would come through and just divvy it up. And people were getting more and more poor. Excuse me. Who's in charge of my water?
Patrick.
Oh, Patrick is, hey, yeah, boy, Patrick, thank you. Thank you. Patrick's worth $1,000. There you go. Just guard it, Patrick, that's all you have to do. Thank you on that. So here they are, here we are. Poland was getting smaller. These were farming people. They were getting smaller pieces of land. They couldn't feed their families. They became more and more poor. Each time, either Prussian, Russian, that whole gang would sweep through, it made life worse for the Polish. What can we do? Where can we go? We're not feeding our families. The birth rate was going up and the poverty rate was going down. The only place you could go was to America. How are you going to get there when you have almost no money? Well, there always had been some people coming in, dribbling, always Polish, some. They made little organizations, and the organizations put together money, and they sent tickets home. Do you know how much it cost to go in the late 1800s, the early 1900s? It cost $50 to go from a city or a town in Poland and come to America, the land of plenty. And so they came. They came as best they could. And they came into Castle Garden. Do you know what Castle Garden was? Come on, guys. Now, listen out there. I can't believe that somebody doesn't know what Castle Garden was. Are you shaking your heads? Yes, no?
She knows. My parents came through there.
There you go. You know the whole world. She's 100% Polish. She got it. All right, Castle Garden is now called...
My mind.
No, I messed up your mind. Castle Garden's now called...
Ellis Island.
Ellis.
You're not supposed to say that. You know that stuff. Ellis Island. It was called Castle Gardens to start with. And it is now called Ellis Island. So where were these people coming into? They came into New York, the city of wonder. You know what? They had plenty of opportunities for work. Because when they were coming in the early 1900s, what was happening? It was like the Industrial Revolution. Everything was happening. All kinds of factories were being built along the New Jersey waterfront and the New Jersey waterfront and New York waterfront. They were all factories. So the men had very small-time jobs, but they were jobs. They were money. Anything they could do, they would do. They worked on the railroads. Our little railroad came through in 1847. So there was always a need along the railroad line because they kept expanding. But there was always a need for crews to work in the railroad wayfront. Always a need for factory workers. They weren't trained to do much of anything. They learned as they went. And the women in Poland, they had no jobs. In this country, they could be governesses, cooks, all kinds of domestic things. They were great, very clean. Let me tell you, super clean on that. And the Polish women always could get a job. And since there were no child labor laws, 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds, go to work. And they had a few pennies, that's all they had. But the whole family worked, and they put their money together because they came here. They came here for a better life. They came here to work, to make their life better. And so they did on that. So here we have this group. But you know what? After living in the city, and many times, 2 families to an apartment, many times, they were worried. They had been farmers. They had been people who were used to being outside, being part of nature. And so here they were. And they were so worried about their children. The city, they felt, was teeming with evils. And so what's new? Teeming with evils, and their children were going to become part of that. They didn't want that. Meantime, in 1912, there was a realtor group in New York City called Klan Development. Yes, it was. Is there anything around here that's named? Don't stop shaking your head, will you please? I'm gonna put a hat on you. They were Klein Realty and Development Corporation. Klein Realty and Development Corporation was on Cortlandt Street, wherever that. I'm not a city person. It's someplace in New York. And they had a one-room office. There were 2 guys involved. 1-room office. And there they were. And they were good thinkers, you know. Benjamin Klein was the boss, obviously. You're falling asleep. So there they were. And what they decided, Benjamin Klein was a smart man, there's no question. Decided, all right, you know what? There's a lot of country out there in New Jersey. A lot of country, not many laws, a lot of country. And so he came out this way. I guess he had got on a train and came out, because otherwise he'd have to walk. But the thing is here he was. So he came out to this country, to this township. And before you knew it, it was all farmers. There was nothing paved. The roads were mud. The place was just open land. But it was owned. And so the farmers sold him. He went from place to place, not far from the train station, right in this area. And so what did he do? He, by 1913, 1 year, he owned 2,000 acres. But you know what? The farmers weren't stupid. They only sold them, of course, not their cropland, but whatever they could get rid of wasn't their most productive land. And so Benjamin Klein purchased that. That was all right. And then he, I don't think anybody here is, oh, you remember, Grant Davis. Don't you remember Grant Davis? Oh, come on, Annie. You lived your whole life here. Grant Davis was an engineer, a real engineer in 1913. Can you believe that? People didn't get educated. They didn't have time to be educated on that. So here, yes, Grant Davis was an engineer, honest to God, engineer. And so Benjamin Klein hired him to make a, where's that wonderful map? A map. 2 maps. One for, you want one map? Thank you. One for, this was the New Jersey Fruit and Farm Colony. Grant Davis chopped up all the land into lots. You could buy a lot and build your own house, or you could buy a house. Let me move out of your way. If you go, those people insist upon you sitting down there, so go on. So, just keep going. Don't go out the door. Come back. Okay, so there they were with these lots. Well, how could people in the city find out about it? Well, you have to remember, people who lived in the city at that time, and I guess still today, their newspapers were in their own language. And so there was a Polish newspaper. There were people who spoke to them and told them, hey, we're going to have this wonderful place out there in the country, and you're not far from the train. So here's my favorite picture. Klein Realty and Development built 2 kinds of houses. One was a gambrel roof with 3 bedrooms upstairs, and the other one was a little gable to the road kind of roof. And it was a smaller one. This was 4 rooms, and this one had 3 bedrooms and whatever was downstairs on that. So there they were. These were the Klein Realty and Development houses. Now, I said to somebody, Rosemary, what we should do is give everybody a piece of paper, and when you go home today, I want you to go right around, and don't go very far, because these houses didn't go past Mountain Road. The land, the 2,000 acres that they owned was Mountain Road and this way. What we should do is send you out with a little piece of paper, and we'll have a contest. Whoever can find these houses today wins the contest. And you're going to find them. This one is going to be difficult because they've had a lot of additions over the years on those houses. This one you can't miss. Now, of course, these poor Polish people in the city were busy working. and they saved their money. Now, Benjamin Klein would be happy to sell you a house if you wanted the house and not just a piece of land. The house would cost between $300 and $3,500. Along with the house, you got a barn, an outhouse, a chicken coop, and the whole house, all for $3,500. I think the smaller one was about $3,000. And you could, is it falling down?
How big is the plat?
You just go right up there and decide which way you want, and tell you how many acres. In those days, you have to remember, there were no planning boards, no boards of adjustment, no, nothing. It was just whatever. Now, when you go out and look around and look at those lots, they were anywhere from 2 to 35 acres.
Wow.
Am I falling? Oh, I thought
No,
maybe-
I'm shocked.
I thought you couldn't hear me. I yell a little louder. Anyway, so that's what it was. That's what it cost you to purchase a house in Utopia, which was 100 pounds. As I said, the houses, the development was from Mountain Road.
That one.
Which one? That one? I don't know which way the church faces. But anyway, so there it was. That was what you had. But you know what? You have to remember that no matter how poor the Polish were, and they were poor, they were deeply religious. Deeply. They never, ever turned on their God. Never. Somehow or another, they managed it. They hung up and they hung on to that. So here they were, coming out to Reddington Township. And this was, as I said, Utopia. And they worked. The husbands went into the city many times. They could take the train. And they would work all week, and they would come home on weekends. Or maybe every other week with a little bit of money. And maybe some kind of a specialty from a shop in New York on that. And so that's what they did. The mother, as one Polish lady said to me, my mother worked like a mule. She took care of the kids. She took care of the house. Don't forget, they were feeding themselves for the whole year out of this garden. How many of you have done canning? Come on, girls, raise your hand. Who cans? Good, thank you. I do too. But that's it. If you have anything to do with farms, you know that you take what produce you have and what you don't eat, you can. Because you've got to get through the winter. And so here they were, out here by themselves. There were no police. There were no telephones. There was no hospital. There was nothing to help these people accept themselves in their own 2 feet. And that's what helped them along. And help. They clung to each other. The Polish clung to each other. But you know what? The Catholic Church had been, it was the Diocese of Trent in those days. And the Catholic Church had been not listening because the Polish weren't the only people here who were Catholic. There were a few other families. Not a lot, because this was a very small place. I mean, this whole county had no more than 3,500 people in the whole county at that time. But here we have this group of Polish who came for a better life. And their life was better. They never had, aha. Here they were, sticking together, helping each other, working with each other. If somebody was sick, the community was there to help. Everything was for each other. Well, finally, the Bishop of Trenton, some ladies, boys and ladies, some ladies went around and counted all the new Polish families and all, it was 10 years and more, and they went all around the whole area and counted the people who were Catholic, the families. Turned out there were 47 new Catholic families. Well, the Diocese of Trenton couldn't ignore them anymore. They ignored them all those years. But they didn't ignore them anymore. 47 families is enough to start a church, to keep your church going, to be able to teach the children their catechism, as we used to call it. Do they call it catechism anymore?
Faith formation.
Oh, I like better than faith formation. That's some strange thing. Anyway, so there they were. If you wanted to be married, you had to get on that train and go someplace down there to get married.
Raritan.
If you wanted, if you wanted the children to receive their sacraments, they had to leave Reading and go to a church someplace else. Finally, 1920s, it decided that they could have a church. Well, immediately, people were ecstatic. We're gonna have a church. A real church. That means we have a priest, and a priest who can say Mass. And so the church agreed. And the church bought this land on which we stand. Whatever you're doing, you're sitting. You're sitting on this land. The church bought it. And the people in the church, remember, the roads were muddy. There was no telephone, no what we call the amenities today. Nothing was available. And so, who did have these big tractors and things that we have today? Those big things, they come on, they go, and 10 minutes later, they're at the house. They didn't do that. And so what did they do? The farmers, because everybody was a farmer. The farmers came and they dug. Joe Wade, who used to be my old boyfriend. He's been dead for a long time, too, Joe. But he was one of the last of the real old-time farmers. Anyway, he lived down on Reddington Road. All right, Joe Wade and his father dug the driveway. You guys don't probably remember the driveway. Where am I now? Which one am I?
Yeah, the driveway was over there.
Yeah, the driveway was right down there. It went right down to 523. Right next, right the driveway. The Bushes, the D-Daggers, these were people who came to help. The Polish people, they came. They wanted that church. And the only way they were going to get it was to little muscles get their shovels out. And they dug it. And they dug also the foundation for the church, which of course is the cellar. On that. Meantime, they got a priest. A priest! Can you imagine that after all those years, hoping they would have somebody, just even if they sent a priest once a month, which they never did, but even if they sent somebody, they would have had somebody. They had nobody all those years. And so a priest came, and his name, where is he? Who turned him around?
I did. Actually, your boyfriend.
Hey, Patrick, want to take that poster, please, honey? And just walk up and down so people can see what it looks like. Please. Father Kanapka. Father Kanapka was Polish. He could speak the language. And I'll tell you, as far everything I've read about him, he was Superman. He was just unbelievable, Father Kanapka. And so he came out to this wilderness. He was 30 years old.
Wow.
He came out as a young priest. And this was a wilderness. I'm not kidding you. It really was. This was the end of the world. Washington walked across the woods here. He did. I'll tell you, that's another story. Anyway, so here he was, 30 years old. He came to White House to be the priest, to get this place moving. Well, that was nice, but when he came, he had no place to sleep, and he had no food, and he had no money. But those Polish wanted him, and they were going to have him, and that's that. So what they did was he slept, they rented, or somebody rented, the second floor of the mill down on Mill Road. We used to have mills. That's another story. We used to have mills with ground grain, for people. And there was this mill house. There was always a house with a mill. And Father Kanapka lived up on the second floor of this mill house. The only food he had was what the parishioners brought him. They were all farmers. So they fed him. And I probably gave him blankets too. It's a little cold in those places without much heat. So there he was. He came. He was this priest, this young priest. He was shocked, when he really, because he was born in someplace like, it wasn't a town. I remember that. Forget the name of it. But anyway, he was. And to come out here, he was a man who really had to love God to put up with what he put up with. But here he came, and he was obviously one of those people from heaven would come down on that, and there he was. They got started on this little old church. And of course they had to have a rectory too. So we do, oh, you don't, do you remember? You know where the old rectory was right over.
Right over there.
Where am I? Right there? Yep. So finally they built. What was the story was the people, as I said, dug the basement, and the people dug the driveway, and they dug whatever they had to dig, and so on. That was just the parishioners. But a professional person. Yes?
It must be God calling.
Oh, it's God calling? You
Yeah.
think so? Could be. Say, hurry up. Keep going. So, there he was. Well, you know what? We have a priest, we're going to have mass. And where did we have mass? 2 masses every Sunday. 8 o'clock in the morning was in English. 10 o'clock in the morning was in Polish. In this little parish. And where could you have, even there was a church, where could you have mass? Zablowski's barn was right next door. In fact, the sad thing is that house, even the house that's there, is the gambrel roof style, but it's not the original house. They put a new house in with modern stuff. And the old, I want to keep the old houses. So they kept, the old house was eventually knocked down when the new one was finished. And so they had Zaplowski's barn. And the daughter of the family told me that every Saturday afternoon, what they would do, clean out the barn, clean it up real good, take all the animals and shove them out someplace into the fields. And then the mass would be there on Sunday morning in this little barn. How many people have gone to mass in a barn? Did you really? Once?
In Vermont.
Oh, in Vermont. Yeah. And this was every single week. Was here, was the mass, was right there on that. And then we have, okay, I have to give you a, see, I always have these little cards that have dates on them. Okay. It was August 19th, 1923, when they broke ground for the church. The 47 Polish families. And a few Irish, we got a few Irish and a few Italians. And so they were farmers, they were all farmers.
Thank you.
You want to stand up? Oh, and so as they progressed on with this, and Father Kanafka was really a pretty active guy. He truly was. He was incredible. What he would do, then he decided, all right, we're building. We've got to raise some money. Because you don't build for nothing, as you well know. Each little person here knows that. So what they did was he said, well, we're going to have 2 fairs a year, and they will be down where the firehouse is now. There was nothing down there. And so he did. And the sad thing is, as everybody, and my little friend Joe Wade, he said, we were so happy. It was so exciting to have entertainment in the country. All they ever did was work. All these farmers, and they didn't have much entertainment, so they had this fair. And B. Landon said to me, everybody in town went, everybody, to these fairs that the church had. And the finest people who came, the ones that we respected most of all and thought were just wonderful, was the Ku Klux Klan. Oh. They used to have the fair down behind, where the firehouse is. They would have the fair in the open field back there, and back there was, just to keep us happy and on our toes, was the Ku Klux Klan. Now you have to remember that during the 1920s, in Central Jersey, anyway, the Ku Klux Klan was big time. Big time. Up in Fairmount, they used to have a meeting place out by Ringo's. They had that little church, which is a church now. And out there, we had the Ku Klux Klan. Anybody they didn't like, anybody they thought not so highly of. And you have to remember that Catholics at that time, in the history of the United States, they were the second-class citizens. They were not considered first class. They were second-class citizens. And so they didn't mind burning crosses. It was okay. It scared people a little bit. They also used to go around to the, now remember the women who were by themselves during the week with these kids and the gardens and the animals and the housekeeping and the home works? Remember, my mother worked like a mule? Mm-hmm. Very true. And right next door at Zablowski's, what did they do? The Ku Klux Klan would come and knock on the door. 2 or 3 guys. Of course, they always had their faces covered. Heaven forbid we should know who they are. There they would come knock on the door. And Mrs. Zablowski would never open the door. She'd gather the kids around her, and she'd say, "What do you want? My husband's upstairs sleeping. I'm awakening him." And they'd disappear. They didn't want a man around who might just punch them. They weren't having anything to do with that. And that's how the Klan worked, as best they could, to frighten the people that were building, that were taking over their community. And so there they were. Well, the church got built. In fact, where's my picture? Okay.
On the side.
Oh, on the other side? Okay, Pat. There we go. Okay. We have one, this picture, I think, is my all-time favorite picture. Because after a while, remember I said they have 2 fairs a year? Mm-hmm. All right. They would then, after the basement, and this is the cellar, kids, look at it. After the cellar was built, they would then move all their dances, which was fun, the only entertainment, once again, that you had around. They would move that downstairs, and these ladies were in charge. And there they are, waving the hot dogs. and then, Patrick, want to walk this around, please? Come. And there they were. The hot dog was 10 cents.
Wow.
That was expensive, really.
Yeah.
It was. But don't forget, it was for charity, too, maybe. I don't know. Sure, the government wasn't giving me anything at that point. But that's what it was. It was all, and they had a lot of fun, and that was the dance hall was the basement. It also was, did you go to dance in the basement? Never did? Okay.
I never went to dance there either. We used to have a little building where they, like.
Oh, we haven't gotten there.
That came later?
Yeah, that was later. That was later.
Well, that's what I remember.
Yeah, that's a good your child. No question about that. Okay, in the meantime, there, where'd you go? Oh, here he goes around the corner this way. Okay. Okay, thank you. And if you look, and I get a kick out of the fact that, let me get this straight now. I'm not gonna get them all. These were Dobuzinskis, you know these names. These ladies were Dobuzinskis. This was Mrs. Zablowski. And this, oh gosh, let me see if I have my little note. Nah, shucks. Oh well, I'll think about it, it'll come. Tonight, in the middle of the night or something. But these were ladies, you would know, these were the great-grandmothers, I think, of what's around here today on that thing. But there they were on that, and they were all working, everybody working to have this church. And good old Father Kanapka, he was still hanging in there. By the time he got transferred, he did everything. It was amazing. Well, wait a minute, there's another one. Let me look around the other side of that one, please. No, that's a little bit later. I don't want to mess up the story too much on that, but anyway, here he was. This is the whole parish. The whole parish. Every single one of them. You can hardly even see them.
My father should be there.
The thing is, it's too bad because it's faded so much, but this was August the 16th, 1924. This was the whole parish. It was the blessing of the completed church, is what it was on this. And the whole parish went. Everybody did. Babies, grandfathers, everybody went to the first. This was such a thrilling event. And you know what? I need to find my handy dandy book. Do you know where it went, by chance? Go ahead. Oh, there it is. Thank you. This is what, I wrote this little book about the lady. Remember I told you the ladies didn't know more about Bushless? This is what came from the more about Bushless on that. So here, that picture. Where'd it go? Oh, there it is. That picture, no, that's okay, Pat. Thank you. The whole parish, that was in November. The first, now wait a minute, kids, hang on. Oh, shucks. Oh, hang on. Don't fall asleep. Wake up. Okay, here we go. November 1923, Thanksgiving Day, marked the laying of the cornerstone and the blessing of the church. Mass was held in the unfinished cellar of the unfinished church. At last, the little congregation had moved out of Sobolowski's barn and into the cellar. That was great, though. They weren't in the barn anymore on that. All right, the first official Mass, the official complete parish Mass was Christmas Eve. And that, you know, Christmas for the Polish is they're very deeply religious. And now you have to tell me how to say this. I meant to ask you before.
Father knows.
Don't ask him, he's taking care of the movies. On that. But what they did was Christmas Eve, now you tell me if I'm wrong, they used to put, the housewives would, no matter how poor they were, they had a special cloth for Christmas, for the table. And they would put the cloth on the table, and they had straw underneath it, is that correct? Underneath was the straw, and on top of the straw was a little dish, am I correct? And the dish had the communion wafer in it?
A płatek.
Say it in big voice.
A płatek.
It wasn't a communion wafer, it was like a communion wafer.
Okay. It wasn't a communion wafer?
No.
Okay. But this was Christmas. And if they had presents, they had presents. If they didn't have them, they didn't have them. But they had this aplakta.
A płatek.
Oh, I'm Irish, I can't get that. Say it again.
Plastic, and that was shared. You shared with each other. You take a piece of it, and you a blessing for everybody that's there.
Yes.
So
A blessing for everybody who
we still do that.
You still do it. And everybody got a little piece of this wafer on that. So they had Mass. And this, I love, this my friend Joe Wade, as I said, who died so long ago. Well, they were 10 children in the family. And there were two guys left, two little old guys left. And they were, the table in the kitchen, my husband used to laugh, he thought it was so funny. the kitchen table looked like it was half the size of this aisle. To get all those kids and the mother and father and anybody else who happened to be around to have some food. And so what they did was, no matter, everybody, some got married, some died, some just went through their own lives. And so what they did was they never changed the table. And so the table was always the Wade's house, you love it. The table was always half the size of this aisle, no matter what. And so if you went into the house and you went into this side, you know, you had to yell down there. Someplace was another person maybe. But that was the Wade farm. That house was beautiful. Architecturally, that's my thing. So, but it was just the Wade house. So I asked Joe. He was very ancient. And I said, I'm writing this book. Would you please write me how you felt on Christmas Eve, the first time anybody in the church. And he did, and this is beautiful. The first official mass in the completed church, he said, but let Joe Wade tell us in his own words of his remembrance. And then he says, the next big event was when the church was completed. Christmas Eve, 1923, was the opening of the church. When the first people started to arrive, about 11:30 o'clock, they found a large cross burning right opposite Pulaski Road. That put a damper on things. But as soon as they got inside the church, they were happy to see such a beautiful church. The organ started to play, and the choir started singing. It seemed as nice as any church in the city. The organ played a Christmas carol, and Harry Engel sang the carol. I can still hear his big voice ringing through the church. George Souch took up the first collection, while the priest walked right behind him and marked down the names of everyone who put in a $1 bill.
It was really very nice.
And he said, I was surprised to see so many dollar bills. A $1 bill then was like a $20 bill today. From that time until the Depression, every Sunday, they put in a lot of dollar bills. I think that the first church comes to a neighborhood, electrifies the people, and they never get over it because the founders of the church talk about it until they die. The first year is so branded in their minds, you remember everything as though it happened yesterday. Isn't that sweet? Good old Joe. Rest in peace, Joe. And so, there we have it. So we have the whole church now. We have people with a $1 bill. That was so $1. In those days, I mean, a kid today can't even get an ice cream home for $1. In those days, you could just buy everything for $1, really, because you did not have cash. What farmers did was eat their own food and try and sell the remainders. That's what farmers do. And they work and work and work and work and work some more. There's very little entertainment, but they are real people. There's no question about that. So now we're getting ready. We're getting to the end of Father Kanaka, 1935. He left. They were heartbroken. Here was a man, what do you think of what he had, what he did here? He came as a 30-year-old. He left as he was 30, 40, 43, when he left. And here he was, he built a church. They built a parish. The whole, and him having fairs so that people could raise money and have fun. Dude, you have to have some lightness in your life. And he could see that. They now could have parish marriages. In 1926, they built what we just used to call the old church hall. Do you remember? Many of them, you remember. On that, we used to have, all right, which way am I going now?
Right over there.
There, okay, the other side. All right, let me see.
It's right over there.
Back of the church, the old church, behind the old church. He built a hall. It was a nice little hall. I can remember before this became about. I can remember I used to teach Sunday school, and I would have the kids every once in a while first a communion breakfast. They all little kids come down. We hoped the eggs weren't too cold or too runny or too awful, but the kids enjoyed it. But we used to do that in that little hall. Also, the weddings that took place. People didn't spend $50,000 like they do today for a wedding. Now you're going to get married. All right, now we have to $50,000. It's going to cost a minimum. They didn't do that. They lived simple lives. No question about that. I always remember Anna Katowski, who married John. She and John got married. Father Konopka married him on a Saturday. On Sunday, they had behind the church, they had in the new hall, I guess you call it, whatever it is.
Yeah, church hall.
I know, it's such a neat thing.
Church hall.
Yeah, so they would, yes, the church hall. And so behind, they got married on Saturday. They had the reception, whatever it was, and somebody said probably Kabasi. And they met, I don't know.
Pete Augie.
Oh, Pete Augie, they probably did, really. And probably everybody in town came, and so on. And there they were. And then on Sunday, they went to Mass with Father Konopka. And then on Monday, John and Anna went back to the little church hall and scrubbed it down to make sure it was clean. That's the way people were in those days. They took care of what they had. They really did. And then they lived up the street from me, and there, they died eventually, of course, on that. But that's what John and Anna did. And so here we have now Father Konopka leaving. But you can imagine the satisfaction in his heart to stand in the driveway of this church and look around and see what he had accomplished, what he and the parishioners had done. They made a Catholic community. They built a church, they built a rectory, they built a church hall, and they had all kinds of friendships that they made in the community. The community didn't want them. They were Polish. They didn't speak the language. They didn't belong here. The people who lived in this community were Dutch and had been so for 200 years. They didn't want all these Poles. But they came, and they persevered, and they stayed. And it was really, when you think about it, it was fantastic. What a corporation he built. All of us, and think about it. Think about what you do in your lifetime. And say, gosh, can I do that? Can I do that? And everybody loved him. They loved him. They were heartbroken. In fact, they went to Trenton to see if they could not have another priest. They could just have him. So here we are dealing with the next line of priests. We have another Polish priest, and Ann, you're going to have to tell me how to spell this.
I'll tell you.
You can say it. You speak. That's right. wait a minute, kids. Next priest was, where have your buddy go?
He's not important.
Here it goes, yes he is. Next priest was Father Tomaszewski.
Tomaszewski.
Oh, that's it, Tomaszewski. Okay, Tomaszewski. And he came after 1935. And he was once again Polish, so now he still had a continuation of the Polish traditions. The Polish were, at that time, don't forget, 8 o'clock Mass was
English.
10 o'clock Mass was
Polski.
A holiday, you got both.
and then holiday was what?
You got both. Same Mass.
You know you were here.
I was there.
Okay, he went through World War II with the whole little community, really. And believe it or not, we had over 200 young men who went to war from this little community. And 2 of them were the Brown kid. Remember? One of the Browns?
Brown and,
And I'm trying to think of it. Not coming. It'll come. Eventually. All right. Then we go on to, after we have Tomaszewski, then we have Father Wade. And this is the big transition. Father Wade, no Polish Mass. No Polish Mass. None. During Father Wade's tenure here, in 1949, the monument was built. And that's what he can claim. But the people, I guess they liked him well enough, but you know, there were still so many Polish people, and this was a Polish church. And no more. And so there were several families that were very unhappy about this because they felt as though the Polish church should continue on the way it was. This is a Polish parish. This is ours. We own it. It's ours. And so they invited Father Kata, is that how you say it? Okay. Kata in from the Polish National Catholic Church. And they were afraid that they would lose their customs. At Easter time, and I always remember, I don't see you doing it too much, I'm going to talk to you. But at Easter time, I always remember they brought these, everybody brought those beautiful baskets, Easter baskets up to the altar. But in the beginning, Father used to go around to the farms and bless the baskets at their homesteads. But now, and they still do, people bring their Easter basket, which has babka and ham.
eggs, hard-boiled
Eggs, that's right, there was at the hard-boiled eggs.
horseradish.
Yeah, horseradish. And those were the staples that were in those baskets. And so, these were their traditions, and they're beautiful. As I said, the Polish were deeply religious people. They always were. On that, so here we have this new church. This church was here. I mean, not this one, but the church was here. The old church was here. But there were several families that said, no, we're going to lose our customs. We're going to lose our heritage. We're going to lose. Down the street on Klein Boulevard was purchased a house. I think it was the second house in, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It's remodeled now, it's a bigger house.
Yeah, it's a big house now, yeah. And that was where the people had their Sunday Mass in the Polish National Catholic Church. Well, what was the difference? All right, the difference was this. The Polish believed that, the people who joined this church anyway, believed no celibacy.
Oh.
They believed the bishop, the Pope, was the Bishop of Rome. He was not the Pope, he was the Bishop of Rome. They questioned papal infallibility. They felt that the land belonged to the people and not to the Church of Rome. They believed it belonged to the people. And they changed a little bit the form of confession, but the Mass itself was the same on that. And so we had some of our very early Polish families left this church and went to church down there. 1958 was the end of that church. It went from 52, I guess, to 58. No, it went a little longer than that, around 50. And that church just died a death of its own because Father Kata was not well. He was very sick. And there were no other priests to take his place. And so that was the end of the split of this church. Was in 1958. He was quite sick on that, and that was the end of it. In a little bit later, when it came to the community and the governance of this community, Mr. Starzak was a Democrat. There are those of us who don't say that word.
What's that?
Democrat. Mr. Starzak was elected to the Township Committee of Reddington Township. He was the first Polish immigrant person who was elected to government in Reddington Township. On that. And he, from what I understand, because I never knew him, but from what I understand, he used to be very kind to the people who still had a heavy accent, a lot of them. And if they had problems that they couldn't understand or couldn't be understood or couldn't, well, that, no, we didn't have cops at that time. We didn't have cops for a long time. But here he was. He would say, come up. And he'd have the person come up to the table of the
Council.
The gang, and explain in his broken English what was his problem, that they could do something about it, try and help him. And it worked out very well. And then we have the next Polish person we had on the committee was not too awfully long ago, was Edgar Rossi. You remember Ed very well. Ed Jaromsky, I have to give him a lot of credit because our township hall before Ed Jaromsky was upstairs in the second floor. It was about 14 steps up to above the firehouse. Not the firehouse, the first aid squad. That was our first township hall. And it was under the eaves. It's okay for somebody like me, because I'm not very tall. But anybody else is tall, they can walk along like this. But that was, Ed Jaromsky was very, very pushy about getting a town hall. And that's why we have this town hall now. So have the Polish done for us. This has been an interesting travel. Yeah, it really has been. There's no question. Life is very interesting. And when you have an influx of a group of honest, good people, your community thrives. And it has. And so, there's lots of cookies out there.
You don't know if Our Lady of Lourdes got its name? Why they picked Our
Oh, no, listen, honey, when the diocese says it's gonna be, you're building a church and it's Our Lady of Lourdes, you don't ask any questions. That's it.
The
It came from Trenton. The diocese gave the name to this church.
Okay,
Yeah, there was no voting.
okay.
Let me tell you, not in 1923.
Yeah, it's understandable.
Even today.
Yeah, true. Yeah, it's just the same, the church, you're getting a church, you're getting a name for it too.
Another question back there?
Did you have any pictures of the old church hall?
Yes, wait a minute, here's the church hall, right here. Oh, and then this picture on the bottom, this little girl is the, oh, was, this is back on dark, she's probably got 18 grandchildren. What is that? All right. Here you go, Pat. Okay. This is the, I'm sorry, I forgot that. This is the church hall. It was 1926. That was the one that Anna and John Gutowski scrubbed on Monday after they got married on Saturday. But they went to Mass on Sunday. Don't forget. And then here, no, hold up, Pat. Okay. This, of course, came from the newspaper, so it's very hard to see. But this little girl over in this guy's, I had her in Sunday school, and she was a little Kanopy kid. And what they would do, I thought that was so sweet, because the hospital opened in 1953. And so these little kids had a dance, and you know, they were dancing, they were the dancers, and they were out there dancing, and people paid them to see them dance, and they decided to give all the money to the hospital, which they did. And there's this little one over here, this little guy, this guy is the treasurer, and he just is loving it. Look at the picture on his face. Look at these little kids, you know, giving money. And they came in their dance costumes, and look at them, they're so cute. Oh, they're beautiful. Those costumes are gorgeous. These are just, you can't touch them. If you touch them, I'd break your hands. Because they don't go over there. But these costumes are so gorgeous and so. These are the dances. This is the boys' dance costume, and this is the girl. And we borrowed them from, what's her last name?
Dana.
What's her last name? Do you know? No,
Peters.
And,
Peters.
PPITS.
oh, okay. And this was their son's costume, and his father says maybe that was their daughter's on that, but they're Polish immigrants, and they still have the costumes, and I borrowed them before. They're just beautiful, they're so gorgeous. So do come up and look at all this good stuff.
Anyone else?
Stephanie, I believe wasn't Frank Davis, was he the engineer for the county?
I'm sorry.
Frank Davis, wasn't he the engineer for the county? Like he's responsible
Oh,
for
Grant Davis, well, his daughter
was Alma. Was Alma.
Yeah, Alma. She was so much fun. She was a funny singer.
Right, but wasn't Grant Davis engineer for the county?
He said, yes,
And he's responsible by, we have White House Lake, that dam there. I think he was responsible for that to be built as well. I don't know when.
well, water, I can't answer that in a second. Water, I can answer you for today, but not for then. Because any water body belongs to the state.
But I think he
So
was,
what, he may very well, yeah, Grant Davis, well, he was a real engineer. I mean,
yes,
he wasn't a
but I believe he was
guy.
like engineer for the county.
Yeah, Grant Davis. And Alma,
Was his daughter.
yeah, was his daughter, she worked in the township, spent most of her time telling jokes. I think she was
There's a question all the way in the back.
Before we close, this is not a question, but a thank you. A very, very large thank you from not only me, but I'm sure I speak for everybody in the room. That not only is the history of this church and this congregation a treasure to the community, but I believe you, Stephanie, And I would like to
We have cookies outside?
We have more than cookies. Roman and Patty have set up a whole refreshment for you out there. We thank you both for being here. And this is only the beginning. There's going to be a lot of things that are going to be happening over the next year. Why? Because there's some things you're not going to believe. That's all I'll tell you. And thank you. Have a good day.